Brian, I am so excited to be with you here today to follow up from the absolutely phenomenal article you wrote for us at Authority Magazine about people pleasing. And the very first thing I'm going to start with is Brian, we all define people pleasing so differently. I know what it means to me, to my sister, and to my friends, and vice versa. What is your 1 to 2 sentence definition of what people pleasing is?
People pleasing is subverting your own needs in order to meet the needs of someone else whose approval you believe is necessary for you to feel worthy.
Mm-hmm. And that worthiness component is so huge because I think worthiness is something that we all struggle with. As children, I feel that we often feel inherently or naturally worthy, but being exposed to the world over time, certain experiences, situations, and environments, that innate worthiness starts to deteriorate. Would you agree?
Well, more so if you are confronted by situations where your worth seems to be conditional.
Mm.
And
Can
I
you
grew up
expand
with
on
it.
that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. My mom was like, how much do you love me? And then I knew the favor she was going to ask is something I don't like, that I wouldn't want to do.
Hmm.
But then she would make that as an act of love, and not doing it would mean I didn't love her.
Hmm.
So mom was very manipulative. Or even a teacher might say, okay, do this or you're going to get in trouble. And all the while in the school system, a child is hungry for opportunities to express their own agency, their own decision making power. But when you enter the school doors, you leave your power outside.
Yes, you do.
So the teacher is pretty much the one who needs to be pleased all day, and your needs don't matter.
Hmm.
So school alone can drill this into you. It's completely dysfunctional, and it is not useful for helping people develop self advocacy, feel empowered, or a sense of what their own needs are and where the barriers or boundaries need to be so that their needs are respected and protected. But all through
Hmm.
school, those are irrelevant.
I'm thinking of something so small, but I had a friend and a colleague once that said when she was in elementary school that she was told she went to the restroom too much. And so what her teacher did was not allow her to go to the restroom, only a certain very, small amount of times per day. And that made it so that as an adult woman, she had a really hard time asking to be excused in uncomfortable situations. So I'm seeing the connection there.
It's amazing how those things can become hardwired in you.
Yes. Yes.
I
And I love
remember,
to, oh, yes, you go.
well, in school, especially as a youngster, I had a nervous bladder. And I was so anxious all the time. So I was frequently asking to go to the bathroom. And I remember one scenario, again, shows how these formative experiences can really drill themselves into you. It was fourth grade. I was raising my hand because I desperately needed to go to the bathroom. And the teacher said, don't raise your hand if this doesn't involve the lesson. So, being a literal thinker, I put my hand down. And then
Mm.
would it get to be too hard again, I'd raise my hand again. Does this have to do with the lesson? No. And then I put my hand down. I think she saw me squirm or something and said, do you have to go to the bathroom? And I remember saying in a very strained voice, yes. Like, thank God for letting me tell you what I needed. But
Hmm.
I didn't say, like, well, it doesn't have to do with the lesson, but I have to go to the bathroom really bad. My brain didn't think like that. It was, I
Mm.
have permission to ask for this by the teacher. So that just, I felt so helpless and unseen in that moment that it stuck with me all these years.
I would love to touch on the unseen component because you mentioned a great phrase, self-advocacy. But how can we advocate for ourselves if we don't really know for true or certain that we matter?
You pretty much give up on it.
Hmm.
You know, nobody's going to help me. Nobody cares. Nobody understands. That's what I hear from kids who've given up on speaking up themselves. And then when they do, and I've worked with teachers and parents over the years that I give the full instruction to, and then they blow it. So I'll say, when a child asks for something, if you want them to continue self-advocating, you've got to meet their needs. But what would end up happening is the teacher would say, "Oh, okay, I will let you go to the bathroom after you do this work." I want to scream from the top of my lungs saying, "Man, did you miss the point?" The
Mhm.
whole point is to show the child that they matter independent of anything else. If you keep throwing conditions in their way, they will learn for the rest of their lives that if I can't deliver for the person who needs to be pleased in order to give me what I want, then I don't measure up.
Mhm.
And I don't
Mhm.
think the teachers and the parents really realize what they're doing when they put those conditions up.
No. And I always say parents are living for the first time too, but this stuff is so fundamental. And I remember as a child, I was very reserved as a child. I'm still a reserved adult, but I didn't like to hug people. And my parents were wonderful. I didn't have to hug anyone that I didn't want to. But I know a family member who makes their child hug all family members, regardless of whether or not the child feels comfortable. And I had an experience where this child walked up to me. She was probably 4 or 5. She didn't know me because I hadn't been around. And she went to hug me. She's very, very visibly uncomfortable. I said, "You don't have to hug me." And her parents were so furiously angry with me. They absolutely lost it with me. And I think something as simple as hugging, not hugging, go to the restroom is a great example of how that does reinforce you are not seen.
Well, I would ask the parent going off on me. I know we learn best in hindsight, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Or for the next time we need to do it. And should that occur again, I would ask the parent, why is it a threat to you for me to have my own boundaries?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in the mix, the parent who's really behind this feels that there is a harsh rejection experienced by the person who's not allowed to hug. And they want their
Mm-hmm.
child to prevent someone from feeling like that without
Right.
ever realizing what it does to the child,
And it's not that child's responsibility in life to make me happy. It's just not.
especially if it's at the expense of their own happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Because then being accepted, being worthy, is all about feeling miserable simultaneously.
Mm.
Doesn't matter what
Do
I
you
want,
think that
but
the
as
wires
long as I'm included.
get crossed? Do you think that the wires get crossed between, for example, if you set up a boundary or place a boundary and try to assert it, right, or try to communicate that boundary, and somebody reacts negatively, how does that impact future boundary setting?
It depends on where you believe your responsibility lies. One thing I teach my clients is that their reaction to your boundary is not your problem.
Mm-hmm.
Your job is to articulate it, explain any repercussions of boundary violations. If they're not clear on how to respect the boundary, tell them that too. If you're
Mm-hmm.
respecting it, this is what you're doing. If you're disrespecting it, this is what you're doing, and this is what I will do. And you
Mm-hmm.
stick by your part in maintaining the boundary. If they get upset, you're not there to comfort them or counsel them or help them accept it, because in the midst of that conversation, they will try to manipulate you and get you to back down. Don't give them the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. Establish it and step back and follow through on whatever you said you would if the boundary was violated.
Let's hone in on clear because I always say clear is kind. I work in communication. Clear is kind, right? When we're clear, being kind to people, but we're afraid to be clear with boundaries for fear of being seen as rude or nasty or picky, whatever negative adjective we're scared of.
And some of that might be people pleasing as well. I want to
Mm-hmm.
set a boundary, but I want them to be happy about it.
I want them to
Because,
love my boundary.
because if they're upset or they're anxious or whatever, I've clearly messed up because I'm responsible for their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Once you're able to set that boundary and realize there's that separation between you and them, it is much easier and feels much more empowering to speak up and say, "Hey, I need to set things straight between us and maybe make a little change in order for this relationship to continue to be win-win. And
Mhm.
if they absolutely won't hear of it, then you've got some decisions to make.
Yes. Let's expand on the separation of you and them, because I think so often we enmesh, and that's just
And we're
a part of
encouraged.
growing up, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we are encouraged to enmesh.
But there's no you and me. There's me and you for me. Like others are a
Mhm.
means to an end. So they're there to be codependent with or to fix, you know? My mom was a big time fixer, rescuer, and that just really enabled the enmeshment because there was this constant disempowering. Let me do it for you. Let me help. And her desire to be helpful was often at the expense of my own confidence. I was always left feeling I can't do it unless mom steps in.
Mm,
And that was
that's
difficult to
interesting.
unravel that.
Well, yeah, because that goes back to the self-agency.
And I think it wasn't until after I had the cancer at 18 that I really realized I need to take charge here. I need to get clear on what my values are and who I am and what I care about, and then live from that place. And of
Mhm.
course, mom then began telling everybody what a horrible son I was because I was setting boundaries with her where I hadn't before.
So it was a shock to her and her nervous system. She didn't know how to handle that.
And she
And how
also,
did you handle it with your mother?
it was very frustrating because she was making stuff up. He said this to me, he said that. Mom was also on the narcissistic side. So anything to make her seem like the victim and me the villain.
Mm. And
So
how
somewhere,
did you deal with those emotions, especially at such a young age?
well, I got my own therapist that I worked with for a couple of years. And as an adult, working through it with my wife was a tremendous help because she's my voice of reason when I get caught up in my emotions. And having that ally in setting the boundaries and then helping talk it through when I think, maybe I should just let it go, maybe I should just give in. She would help me remember why I was doing this in the first place and what's at stake if I stop doing it. So having that moral support is really critical because otherwise it's you against the world. And it is much more
Hmm.
difficult to stand on your own 2 feet.
It is. I want to touch on the world part too, because environmental factors are huge. And what we see with social media, or what I think we've seen with social media, is an increased enmeshment and increased availability, right? And it makes those boundaries harder to set when your phone constantly rings, or your phone constantly pings, or your phone constantly dings. How do
Well, you
you
have a boundary
navigate
setter
people
called Do Not
pleasing?
Disturb.
Yes, we love that. They put it right in our phone.
Well, one of the things you point to there is social media has become this place where you are as relevant as you are popular.
Yes.
You need the likes and the hearts and the shares and all this stuff. And people really need to get clear on why they are on social media. What purpose does it serve for them? And it cannot be to feel good enough.
Hmm.
One term that just kind of flew out of my mouth one day when talking to a client who is complaining about, man, I don't get enough likes and people aren't noticing my posts. And I post more and I do this and I spend more time on it. I said, it sounds like you're chasing good enough.
Hmm.
Is you're looking for that threshold that's going to make you feel seen and good enough. And social media is not going to do that for you because there are too many people who are always doing better and it's too tempting to compare yourself.
Hmm.
So unlearning that need to compare and that need to quantify your worth.
Hmm.
If I have this many likes, then I'm good enough. Can't see it that way.
Or this many clients. A lot of business owners do this many clients, I'm good enough. Salespeople, this many sales, I'm good enough. And it's so funny the way that we chase work, because it manifests different in every single one of us.
Those companies that have, top earner of the month or employee of the month, they dangle those carrots out there to tell you we will notice you once you've done these things.
Mhm.
Good old capitalism and competition, destroying our sense of worth in service of productivity.
Mhm.
Whoever's most productive gets the award. I can't compete under those circumstances.
Yeah. And I think of pageants. I grew up doing
Those type.
pageants. Whoever is the most beautiful or whoever's the most well-spoken wins.
Whoever's poised and proper and meets the stereotypical definition of femininity.
Yeah, exactly. And we can really do that with sports. Whoever's the tallest, whoever's the broadest in football, whoever's the quickest or whatever it is, we put these labels and standards on kids. And then, oh, you don't measure up, you can't play that position. And can read so many great stories about running backs, quarterbacks who were said to be too small. And yes, too small or too not tall enough. And they had to overcome that through themselves.
If they're faster than the person trying to tackle them, I consider that an advantage. Who cares what the size is?
I do too. I do too. But you'll have to fact check me. You can read a lot of stories like that, but we all seek worth in a totally different direction in a totally different way. So, what's the overarching three pieces of advice, I guess, you would give to really eradicate this behavior of people pleasing and not even entirely eradicate, but work towards 1% better, 5% better, or 10% better?
Know thyself is critical. Because one
Mm-hmm.
thing that's helped me the most is to really get familiar with what it means to be human. And with that is the inherent fact that we learn best by making mistakes. And yet, there's something about our cultural ethos on the one hand saying, you're a loser, you're supposed to win, you screwed up, whole teams hear this. What did we do wrong? Can we also say, hey, that went different than we intended, but I bet you there are some opportunities to learn here. Let's look for those. How you frame it has a lot to do with it. But
Mm-hmm.
learning that as a human being, you will make mistakes no matter what. And that's a good thing because it helps you learn and become more resourceful. People that chastise that for you are pretending they don't know that. So you know that we're all in the same boat. Some people are trying to camouflage that they're human, but you know better. So when they're pulling that nonsense, you can say to yourself, all right, you're kidding yourself. You're trying to convince me that you've got it all together. You don't make as many mistakes as I do. You're full of it.
Mm-hmm. We all
And
make
then
mistakes at some part of our life.
it's so it's easier to dismiss that because you know they're blowing smoke.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big one. Embrace your humanity and all of the imperfections that come along with that. And this is kind of
And
a
they're gloriously imperfect as well. I'd add that.
when you read the history of any inventor and how many times they blew up the lab or broke something or made a mistake, and you're like, okay, great, we're on track. One more
Well,
thing
do
that
it
didn't work.
again.
Yeah, taking an imperfect action is an important one. It comes
Mm-hmm.
from the place of curiosity, saying, well, let's take this step and see what happens. You're
Mm-hmm.
not saying, oh, I hope I don't screw this up, or I better get it right, or I'm a loser. You're just saying, let's see what happens. And then whatever
Mm-hmm.
does happen, you then ask, how do I make use of this? Does it tell me never to do that part again? Does it tell me, hey, that works, I want to continue doing that? Or maybe I need to add something to it, tweak it in some way. But feedback is not failure. It's
Mm-hmm.
information you use to inform your next action.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it's how you frame it. So a third one on overcoming people pleasing. Find one thing that you can do just for you. Nobody's giving you permission. Nobody's saying, hey, that was a good idea. You're not looking to share it with someone later to see if they're happy about what you did. It's just for you. Schedule it on your calendar. And when you sit down to do it, you can say things to yourself like, this really feels nice. This feels good. I feel happier. I feel calmer. I feel more grounded. And just be with the need you are meeting and that you are taking the time to notice yourself, your own worth, and to just be with that.
Hmm. Would you recommend for that activity keeping it somewhat close to your chest and not sharing it with everyone so that you maintain the intent of keeping it to yourself?
You don't need other people saying, "Oh, well, that doesn't help me. What I would do is, or what you should try." People
Oh
always
yeah,
want to
because
stick
there's a
their
there's a
nose in.
million self-help articles out there.
Yeah.
But what's right, it's subjective to you. And I found that meditation, I can't do it. But EFT, I love it. And it really is finding the balance that makes
There
sense
are a
for you.
lot of ways to be present. And I've been doing
Mhm.
meditation for decades, and it's an incredible practice for me. But like you said, there are people that misunderstand it and therefore don't practice it, or they can't do the sitting still. They're too squirmy. But there are things that they can tune into and be present with, and that can really pay dividends if you do it over time.
Yes. Well, I found walking meditations to be phenomenal for me.
I used to do those when I was walking better, but I find opportunities to just tune into some white noise and be present with it, or
Hmm.
watch my breath, do the traditional meditation, or just close my eyes and listen to the birds outside. Not now, of course, because it's winter and who knows where they are.
But when they come back,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most misunderstood thing about people pleasing or people pleasers themselves?
Is that they enjoy it.
Mm.
Oh, I enjoy helping other people. It just really fills me up. Really? I
Does it
mean,
always?
if if a core value of yours is contribution and you volunteer, you're helpful, that's great. But if that's not balanced with self-care, you got a problem.
Hmm.
If you seem like you can't not do it, you can't say no to it, you're likely a people pleaser. But
Hmm.
being able to step back and say, not this time, and feel relatively guilt-free, at peace with your decision, that's healthier. But if you say
Hmm.
no and feel like you've just killed someone's puppy, then there's probably some people pleasing stuff going on.
We should never feel like that. That's not a good emotion to carry with us.
The main thing you should feel is kind of a firming or an awareness of your integrity.
Mm.
I'm saying this because this is important. I stand for this.
Mhm. Yeah, this is giving me a lot to chew on even for my life. You're
It's also
giving me the
something we
word
can
out
stand to
here,
think about.
Brian.
Yeah.
What would be if there was a nugget or a piece of advice or a sentence? If people were going to walk away from this conversation and for the next 5, 10, 15 days, chew on something, what would that be?
It's one thing, huh?
I know I make these questions so hard, don't I?
Maybe every time you find yourself doing for someone else, check in and ask yourself, when's the last time I did something for me?
Mm,
And the longer it's been, the sooner you need to do something.
yes. And that's very measurable.
Mhm.
It's very tangible. It's very easy to count and very easy to put into application quickly. Oh my goodness, Brian, I've had so much fun with you and so much fun just deconstructing the concept of overcoming people pleasing. In my case, I thought it was something I was going to overcome in a day, like a light switch. I very quickly realized how false and how misconstrued that idea was. And I'm going through my own journey of deconstructing people pleasing because I've always suffered and struggled under that weight and just
And
letting
there,
that weight go
and the
percent by
earlier
cent has
it's
been
start,
fantastic.
the earlier it started in your life, the more layers you need to peel to get to it. So it's something that keeps coming back around over and over, but you peel it and you deal with it each time, and then it becomes less and less of an obstacle for you.
Yes. Do you hear that, beautiful people? Just keep peeling the layers. We are all like onions deep down.
And don't think you're going to finish. You do all the work you can along the way, because each layer that you pull away is more of you that feels safe being vulnerable to life. So
Hmm.
you can take things in more fully and deeply.
Oh my goodness. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up? Or do you feel like you've said all that you can say?
Well,
I think you've done a pretty excellent job.
it's not all that I can say, but it's definitely enough for people to, as you said, chew on it, work with it, and see what they want to implement.
Yes. Brian, thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with me. I appreciate you.
It's a downright pleasure, Brooke. I love our conversations.
I love them too. Well, thank you so much to everyone as well that's joining us.